When we talk about nature, whether it's a rainforest, a mangrove, a coral reef, we often use the terms like ecosystem, habitat, or let me, one moment, let me see. Yeah, if I can, okay, let's go back to, okay, never mind. So we often use terms like, oh, where we are, like ecosystem, habitat, and ecological niches interchangeably. But they describe a very different layers of how life is organized in nature. Understanding the distinction is critical, especially if we are trying to restore or protect these systems. Let's start with the ecosystem. Yeah, let me highlight with the darker color here. We are going to start with the ecosystem. So ecosystem is the big picture, literally the big picture that describes everything within the environment around us. And it is divided into two major things. Biotics, which is the living organism that lives inside the system, and then abiotic, which is the non-living thing, like soil, air, sun, or anything that is not biological, you can say, okay? Soil, sunlight, temperature, water, air is abiotic. But this medium, although they are abiotic, they are not biological. They are either the body of the system or part of it that supports the biotic side of life. When we combine everything together, like in this picture here, the whole thing, the birds, the dragonfly, the mountains, the sun, the wind, the clouds, the trees, the water plants, the fishes, everything in this literally is part of an ecosystem. So biotic are plants, animals, and microorganisms, literally including the microorganism like bacteria, for example. Okay. So this is the larger picture. Every time people say something about an ecosystem, it is the large picture. If someone says, and someone who knows about it, says the ecosystem has collapsed, this will be catastrophic. That includes everything in it, right? Biotic and abiotic are no longer functional, therefore a collapse of ecosystem. Okay, so that rarely happens. If it does, it must be something really catastrophic happens. Okay, like a huge natural disaster happened. Okay, so normally what was impacted are habitats. In an ecosystem, like we saw in the picture on the left-hand side here, there are many habitats, including the air above the inside the ecosystem is a habitat for something that lives in it. in the water, inside the water, contained inside the water, whatever bacteria and things like that. On the seabed, on the riverbed, and then the plants, the inside, in between the strands of grass, are habitat to something, even tiny little ticks and insects. And then on top of the water itself, then in the soil, on top of the soil, of course, we can see a deer standing on the soil, but underneath the soil maybe are earthworms and termites and everything that lives in it in many, many, many layers. This combination of, if you can say, division of the ecosystem into many, many habitats where something lives in or inside or on top of it. Okay? So habitat can contain one or more organism that normally lives. If two organisms live together in the same habitat, they are called symbionts. Okay? They are called symbionts because they live together. Either mutually or parasitically, they live together. So a habitat can be shared still. So a natural home of a physical environment where organism lives and finds resources they need to survive. Okay? So back to the ecosystem. Ecosystem, which is the biggest picture, an ecosystem is everything that works together as a living system where living things like plants, animals, and microorganisms, and the non-living elements like water, sunlight, temperature, nutrients, soil, and everything else is not just a place. It is the interaction that defines it. Then it is called an ecosystem. But then, if we take the coral reef example, you have corals, fish, algae, plankton, bacteria, but also you have currents, water currents, sea currents, sunlight penetration, water chemistry, temperature, which is the abiotic part. Then the reef is only functional because all of these elements interact. But now we move on to the habitat. When we start to zoom in into the ecosystem, if we zoom in into the ecosystem, we start to identify areas where some animals live there. They choose to live there. Yeah. For example, the earthworm inside the soil habitat. Then a habitat is a specific physical place where an organism lives. It is more like an address. Okay. So if the ecosystem is a nation or a country or a city, then the habitat is a specific address where someone lives. Okay. So even in a coral reef, there are multiple habitats inside. You have the reef crest, the reef slopes, clownfish, and everything else. A parrotfish might roam across reef flats for grazing. So there are animals that move within the habitat. Okay. So then, we have a city and we have the addresses of different places where someone lives. A natural home or physical environment where organisms live and finds resources that they need to survive. Different organisms can share the same ecosystem, like I said, but live in different habitat based on their needs. Okay. If they truly share a habitat, then they are symbionts, we call it. Okay. Then inside the habitat, inside the home, inside this address, are something else called the ecological niches. Okay. It is called the ecological niches. Then the role and position of a species in its ecosystem, including how it obtains food, interact with each other, and contribute to the balance of the environment. Okay, so in this diagram, I put bees and birds and mushrooms and snake. So ecological niches also is defined by dietary, by food chain as well. It is also defined through many ways that things live. Niches reduce competition by having a separate niche. Organisms live harmoniously together because they knew what is yours and what is mine, literally. Okay? Or they are contributing to maintenance of niches, like predators. Predators, their role is to feed on excess population of prey. And therefore, they maintain available niches for healthy prey, and then they consume the one that is weak. Example, they maintain that niche. Fungi is a decomposer. It breaks down dead matters and recycle nutrients. Bees are pollinators that help plant reproduction. They're all niches where something is happening, whether to reproduction and food chain as well. Okay? So these are tiny little niches where everybody plays a single role. And in the coral reef, it's the same. There are many tiny little fish that feeds on, say, parasitic copypods and stuff that irritates coral polyp, for example. And the copypod, their niche, is on top of the coral. But then there are fishes that feed on them, and they use the surface of the corals as their ecological niche, where they feed and they find and they play the role in that niche to maintain the health of the coral. This is example. Okay? So that is the basic part of it. Let's move on to a little bit more complex. Okay? Let's move on. Let's move to the next slide. If you have any question, you can ask me now because I'm taking my sweet time here. And let's look into where we are working. We are working in the marine ecosystem. Yeah. So when we talk about marine ecosystem, the big picture are community living and living organisms interacting with each other and with the physical environment as a system together. They live together. Why is it important to understand this? Because when we understand this, we start to think that, hey, when coral die, there is a reason. There is something that went wrong in this system, correct? And that can be from any of the ecological drivers, we call it, whether the seawater quality or there's a disease, there's an outbreak or imbalance of something because the services of the planktivore did not feed on certain kind of microscopic organism that is gonna cause disease to spread. For example, there is something in the ecosystem that went wrong. when we talk about a coral reef that is collapsed, it is actually the end of the catastrophic loss. The beginning of the catastrophic loss was failed to be identified. Maybe the water quality, maybe the change of, maybe there's too much of fishing on one specific species that is contributing to controlling something in the coral reef. Overfishing, we call it, yeah? Overfishing of a specific species, for example. There is something in the ecosystem as a bigger picture. So the biotic component are coral, fishes, invertebrates, algae, plankton, sponges, bacteria. There are many, many biotic functions, biotic components. The abiotic is the water, the sunlight, the temperature of the water, the currents, the salinity, the nutrient, and the substrate. When we talk about the abiotic, okay, this is the part that we must understand. Abiotic means structural, but non-biological, okay? So when we talk about structural, can an artificial structure be abiotic? The answer is yes, but that is defined as alien abiotic structure, okay? Alien abiotic component, because it doesn't occur naturally. That is what happened, okay? Then we raise question as well. Hey, if it is non-biological, what role does marine biologists do in artificial reefs, for example? Their expertise is on biotics, organism, biology. What business do they do in abiotic structure, especially alien abiotic structure? This is the question never been asked by anybody, because scientists like me will be able to say, hey, look, it's not even your scope of expertise. They can tell you, hey, I'm a marine biologist, I'm entitled to this and that, I'm going to put artificial structure. Nobody is going to ask them. It's not even their scope of expertise. Because if they were going to put structure, they have to be engineers, right? So this is the thing that we must correct when we learn ecosystem, habitat, and conservation. Then comes the habitat within the ecosystem. The coral reef habitat, the seagrass habitat, the mangrove habitat, and the sandy bottom. Every single one of these are interconnected, interlinked, whether it's biologically or abiotically, then it has things that is happening. But then when we talk about habitat, there are many different habitats in the coral reef itself. There are crabs and shrimps and tiny little fishes that live in habitats between the branches of coral. There are also crabs and lobsters that live under the structures of corals and crevices, right? There are fishes that live above the coral structure, but not directly inside it. Yeah, this is what you will learn when you learn ecology, marine ecology, because fishes have many different layers where they live. Yeah. So these are the reef habitat. The seagrass habitat is a shallow, sandy areas normally, and there are nurseries and feeding ground for many marine species. They are just as equally important. The sea plants and the coral reef, they cannot be separated, because the seagrass and the seaweed near shore plays an important role in filtering away nitrogenous compound, phosphorus, that actually can harm corals. This is why seagrass habitats normally are positioned near shore, whereas the coral reef is positioned further out from the seagrass meadow, away from the shore. Because any effluent that flows into the sea from land will first be filtered by the marine plants. And then cleaner water arrives at the coral reef. Not just that, between these two habitats, there are nutrient exchange as well. Okay? We know that corals are animals and they are consumers of oxygen and producers of carbon. And we know also that the seagrass are plants, they are users of carbon and also producers of food material. Okay? So these are the exchange. They also produce oxygen needed by all marine life. Okay? So they work together. When we work with ecology, then we realize, hey, look, plant, whether it's algae or seagrass or seaweed or phytoplankton, they belong in the ocean. When they occur in large quantities or the population suddenly bloom, it's an indication that something on the seafloor or in the water that carries nutrient indicative of why the plant population is dominant over coral, for example. Yeah. This again, when we talk about artificial structure, when people put artificial structure in the ocean, they introduce what they introduce? They introduce a clean surface. A clean surface of man-made material may leach something into the ocean. Remember that sea plants, whether it's algae, seagrass, seaweed, or phytoplankton, they are absorbent material. They are absorbing nutrient, or more specifically, harmful nutrient. If the material of the artificial reef is releasing this, then we have algae growing on it. Not just a little bit, but a lot of algae will grow on it. It's a reactive situation. It is a reaction to what was leaching in the water. So what's the root cause of coral degrading on an artificial reef? Is it the algae or is it the material that you put in the sea? The root cause of why algae grow on those material is that the material itself that you introduce in the water is leaching something, encouraging algae to grow, and therefore you blame the algae for smothering your coral. It's not a very smart idea, okay? So this is why we must understand habitat, positioning, materials, and why they work together. Mangrove are coastal zone with roots that protect shoreline, trap sediment, support juvenile marine fish, a nursery, we call it, okay? So they also play an important role in preventing erosion or storm damage to shoreline, as well as to break up solids when effluents are flowing from land into the ocean. Okay? Those are habitats where many things are living inside. Seagrass are as diverse, life living in the seagrass are as diverse as the coral reef. You can find seahorses, pipefishes, some fishes that actually live in the seagrass. And then you have invertebrates, nudibranchs, and shrimps and crabs and everything that lives in that as well. And mangrove, unquestionably, it is a nursery for those animals. Then you have the sandy bottom. Wow, there's nothing in the sand. What? Nothing in the sand? There is a sandy habitat, the sand communities, we call it. The sand communities, the sand and rubble areas are important for burrowing species and species of invertebrates. What do they do? What do these sand communities do? They normally are recyclers. Recyclers of what? Detritus, or solid materials, or solid waste. They are recyclers. They break them down. They are also contributing to nutrient exchange to their surrounding. What is their surrounding? Mostly seagrass and sometimes coral. Where do seagrass grow? They grow on sand, adjacent to the reef. And then there are sand beyond the reef as well. And sand harbors useful bacteria. And what those bacteria will do? They will decompose, of course. So sand is a habitat. There are four key habitats in the marine environment are sand, mangrove, seagrass or seaweed meadows, and coral reef. That are also another habitat that I did not mention here is the blue water. Okay, some fishes live entirely their life in the blue water. They never stop swimming, and then they are normally predatory fishes. They are important as well because when they go to feed in the reef, from one reef to another, they carry some sort of nutrient with them from the other reef. Okay? They contributed to the biomass of the ecosystem of the coral reef. Then when we talk about ecological niches, okay? When we talk about ecological niches, then there are far more ecological niches can be found in the coral reef as compared to terrestrial habitats, okay? So in the open water, in the water column, there are planktons, then there are reef-building corals, and within the reef-building corals are niches as well for smaller organisms to live. And there are predatory fishes that live in the open water above it and maintains balance. Then there are herbivores that maintains excess and eat up excess algae and allow balance to be restored in the coral reef. Okay, algae are far more grow far more rapidly as compared to corals, and therefore the ecosystem needs somebody to play a control, and therefore the herbivores comes. And then you have the cleaner wrasse, the cleaner fish, butterfly fish, banner fish. Those are cleaners. What do? They maintain the health. The cleaner wrasse maintain the health of the predatory fish by eating parasites on them. They establish a habitat or a niche called the cleaning station. This cleaning station amazingly will welcome everyone, and it is a neutral ground. When a predatory fish comes to the neutral ground, they will not eat their prey. Their prey can roam around next to them, even swim in front of them out. Okay? The cleaning station established this neutral niche. And then it even allowed the cleaner fish to go inside the mouth and the gills to clean parasites in them. And then there are cleaner fish like the banner fish. They eat parasitic organisms that infect corals. So there are also taking care of the health of the corals. So these are niche, different things that eat different diet in different places, but when they combine together, creates a harmonious connection. So then we talk about the bioeroders like sea urchin, sea cucumbers, which are generally called the vacuum cleaners of the sea floor. So what do? They consume particles that is unconsumable by others, and then they break them down and cycles the nutrient and distribute the consumable nutrients to other organisms nearby. Okay? And there are planktons that feed the entire food web, literally, because they are the base. They feed the planktivores, and the planktivores being fed on by predatory fishes, and then the larger fishes consume the mid-level predators, and the chain goes and on and on and on. Okay? Planktons are also fed on by corals, which is in the heterotrophic way. It consumes plankton. Why does it need to consume plankton? People say they absorb sunlight through photosynthesis. Yes, there are symbiotic algae that lives inside coral that consumes carbon and return oxygen to the coral, as well as converting the carbon into carbohydrate, which is given back to the host coral as a source of energy. So if that is available, why do coral need to eat? Yes, that is consuming sugar, consuming carbohydrate for metabolic purpose, the photosynthesis thing. But they need proteins, they need amino acid, they need a lot of things, just like us. So therefore, at night, corals will capture plankton and feed on them and digest them, and the waste of their heterotrophic processes will become nitrogenous compound or ammonium-based compound, which is fertilizer for the symbiont algae cell that lives inside them, right? So the algae would take away the nitrogenous compounds and whatever that is byproduct of the feeding of the coral, and they get food to thrive. In return for ammonium, for example, the plant cell will convert the ammonium into amino acid, which is a part of a growth enzyme for the coral tissues. So everything have a niche, and each niche is working together, whether it's in tandem or reciprocal, they work in tandem. Why does this so important to us? Because now we realize, oh, it is very complex. If something goes wrong in here, we need to find out, and it is a daunting task then to find out the root cause of the problem. Then why not play pretend? Just throw something in the ocean. We call it rehabilitation. Solve the problem. We don't have to think. It will not work that way forever. We can play pretend for next 60, 50 years. But as the environmental condition degrade, ecosystem collapse, we will in the end have to find through science a formula or a system to identify and solve the root cause of problem through not abiotic methods, but through biotic methods, through biology. This is the true science of solving problems. Okay? So this is why we need to know this. Now we know that I'm just talking about the surface of this thing. When you learn ecology, the ecology course, it is a 20-session lecture, and it spans over 6 months, and you will learn each of this, and then how it interacts with each other, and then also the system of working with them. Okay, so this is the thing that we need to learn. So now it connects everything. From the bigger picture, when we first arrived at the ocean, we saw the ecosystem, the whole thing, from shore or beyond the shore even, and the water, under the water, and then in the water column, to the seafloor, to everywhere, is the ecosystem consisting of biotic and abiotic components. Then we have the habitats that looks isolated but never isolated. They are interconnecting and working with each other through the chemistry of the ocean. Okay? And then within this habitat, there are so many ecological niche that harbors a specific organism, and those organisms provides what we call the ecological services. Each of these guys is providing a service to its host. What's the host? The coral reef. Every single one of these is providing some kind of ecological services to make sure the harmonious balance of the coral reef is met. Okay? If we catch too many of the predatory fish, then something will cause the herbivores, the population of herbivores, to swell or to become overpopulated. And then when they graze too much algae, it's not even good. So if they remove algae, why is it not good to the coral? Yes, herbivores is not like people. People goes to the artificial reef with brushes. They brush everything away. Herbivores is not like that. They are selective feeders. They're selective feeders, and they eat what is needed and leave the rest intact. Why? For the rest to do their ecological services. The algae have their ecological services, absorbing harmful materials, right? But then they cannot allow the algae to be overpopulated. That's why the herbivores is there. So everything is layer by layer interconnecting and working together. So let's look at the next one. Any question? Okay. This is 2 places I worked in the past. One is called Maya Bay in Thailand. Okay. I'm going to talk about Maya Bay, and I'm going to talk about another ecosystem in the Philippines, in Darwin. For example, I use this because it's a stark contrast between ecosystems. Yeah. Not is because one is better than the other, but each ecosystem is unique. Okay. What you are looking here are 2 different marine environments, Maya Bay and Darwin, but they are governed by the exact same 3 principles: ecosystem, habitat, and ecological niche. Okay, so the exact system, 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so let's start with the one on the left, Maya Bay. Maya Bay is a powerful example of what happened. What happened when an ecosystem is pushed beyond its limits. This is why it is here. This is why it is a story today. Okay. And what happened when pressure is removed? Okay. It's destruction. We are going to look a little bit at its destruction, and we are going to look a little bit at its rehabilitation. Before the closure, if you know about Maya Bay, it's been closed for conservation in 2018. In May 28, 2018, I was there. And then it was reopened in 2022. It's a 4-year initiative of rehabilitating the Maya Bay. Before the closure, the ecosystem was heavily disrupted by tourism. You can see up here, right? So then it also disrupted by pollution, physical damage, boat traffic, sediment disturbance, and interference with natural processes like anchoring and braking and stepping and everything else. Okay? Maya Bay, for your information, the size is only 450 meters wide. And during the time that was in the heyday of mass tourism, an estimated of between 3,000 to 6,000 visitors will be on that 450-meter stretch at every given hour during the opening time, between 9 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. There will be around 300 to 400 boats going inside and going out of the bay, dropping the anchor and pulling and destroying everything else on the seafloor. This is what happened. Okay? So, the key insights I'm going to give you, it wasn't just coral loss. It is an ecosystem failure. When the bay is closed, we didn't immediately fix the reef. Instead of pressure, we are trying to remove the pressure. We allow the first 1.5 months of no disturbance entirely. Okay? Removal of pressure entirely. So we did not immediately fix the reef. A lot of people misunderstood. They think, oh, we close and we are going to plant coral tomorrow. No, we are addressing the collapse of the ecosystem. This is what a lot of people get it wrong with Maya Bay. Okay? And what followed is the gradual return of the ecosystem processes. First, because there is no sediment stirred up by boat propellers, water becomes clearer, a lot clearer than it used to be. Then, fishes, starting with the tiny little grazers, parrotfish and rabbitfish, starts to appear there. Natural grazing resumes. Nutrient and energy flow start to stabilize. And this is why I would say recovery begins when the system starts to function again. It is not my magic hand that go plant so much coral there. It is the ecosystem that helped itself to recover. Yes, I planted a lot of coral. I was helping with the coral. I was teaching people how to grow coral. But that is not the main goal. That is only part of the goal. The bigger goal is the recovery of an ecosystem. And that story was never told. Right? So today, finally, that story comes to you. Then now looks at the habitat layer in Maya Bay. Large areas were covered in unstable rubble. What do I mean by unstable rubble? It is covered in rocks that is not attached to the seafloor. Why was that? Imagine the movie The Beach is made in 1999 and is out on year 2000. And since that time, tourism suddenly boomed, and the anchoring and pulling and anchoring and pulling continues from year 2000 until 2018. 18 years of anchoring and breaking. Nothing is solid, nothing is fixed. Every rock, every dead coral is, you can roll them around. It is unstable. Yeah. The habitat becomes unstable rubble. This is critical because no matter how many coral larvae present in the water, they cannot settle on moving substrate. So the limiting factor is not larvae. It's not that coral don't go back there and try to reestablish. It's that the habitat is stability has been compromised. Okay? So through the substrate stabilization, that is when we intervene, we rearrange and make them stable again. Stabilization of the substrate. And then the microhabitat began to form. To our delight, we start to see even ghost pipefish and smaller reef organism begins to populate the habitat. Okay? But how long does it take for it to happen? About 8 months down the line, we still looking at water, rocks, and sand. Nothing else. Approximately 8 months, we saw the first sea urchin. We cried when we saw it. Okay? So then we realized that everybody is slowly and cautiously coming back. Okay? That's the habitat. Then the crucial lesson we learn here is that we did not plant a reef. We restore the conditions for a reef to rebuild itself. I repeat, the crucial lesson here in Maya Bay is not that we did not plant a reef. We are restoring the conditions for the reef to rebuild itself. Then what do we do? Yes, we propagate some corals. Why do we do that? Because we help speed up the process of recruitment instead of relying on natural recruitment through larvae settlement. But we will not do more than is necessary. We are introducing genes of coral there before the natural larvae settlement starts to occur. This is what the coral reef work in Maya Bay. And then the ecological niche in Maya Bay. What happened there? Then it starts to harbor herbivores. We go and survey at night in between the rocks that we have stabilized. We start to see parrotfish sleeping in between those rocks. Then we realize that we have re-established ecological niche. No matter how fundamental that will be, it is coming back. Okay, right. So I tell you the story now about Maya Bay, its ecology, its habitat, and its ecological niche. Now let's go to Darwin in the Philippines. So you can take whatever, AirAsia or Cebu Pacific or whatever, you go across. Then you go to Philippines and you go to Darwin. Darwin is located in the island of Negros, to be specific, at Negros Oriental. There are two sides of Negros Island. So then, at first glance, Darwin looks completely different. There are fewer dramatic coral structures. Yes, it is not like what you would find in Palawan, for example. If you want to know, Darwin sits in the Sea of Bohol, in between Negros and the island of Bohol. Okay? So there are fewer dramatic coral structures, and instead you see sandy sandy slopes and volcanic substrate and what may be called empty spaces. There's a lot of empty spaces. But this is where perception can be misleading. Darwin is not empty at all. It is one of the most functionally rich ecosystem that you can encounter. Okay, let me repeat it. It is one of the most functionally rich ecosystem that you can encounter. This is why I put Darwin here instead of other places, okay? Because it is significant to me. Then we start with the ecosystem. Why does that happen? The ecosystem here is different. Nutrient is flowing in literally all directions, from the upwelling, from deeper waters up to the shallows, to the tidal currents that is distributing from one location to the other. And this nutrient flow allows organisms to thrive. And then the volcanic substrate, the black sand substrate, influencing chemistry. And then the connectivity with nearby reef and seagrass and mangrove also play a role in extending the ecosystem deeper down. The biodiversity here is not always obvious, but it is incredibly dense at the micro level. Microorganisms on the sandy slopes are incredibly diverse and abundant. Okay, so the ecosystem connects to any shallow reef nearby, and it connects to seagrass meadows near the shore, and it connects to mangroves at some places. So the habitat, let's look at the habitat, how different it is from the Maya Bay. From coral reef to seagrass bed to mangrove to sand, marked bottoms. It says here, marked bottoms. Each habitat has unique conditions that support specific life. Believe me or not, I make 3 dives here. 3 dives per day. And I did 3 days. That's in total 9 dives. I wrote a small book about Darwin. That's how many pictures I took. Literally, I fill my hard drive with pictures of marine organisms I found in 9 dives. Okay? So, I'm not trying to sell Darwin here. There are places like Darwin elsewhere as well. So, a small patch of sand can be the perfect habitat for burrowing shrimp, a mimic octopus, or a juvenile fish, and sometimes slightly disturbed. If you slightly disturb that patch, the habitat will disappear instantly. Literally, there are animals that live under the sand in burrows, in holes that collapsible. It can collapse and totally hide them inside. Yeah. Then, this is the very different habitat as compared to the coral reef. but the principle is identical. If the habitat is not right, life will not persist there. Why life persists on that black sand is because the habitat is suitable for that particular living organism. So now the fascinating part about that is if you look deeper, the ecological niche. This is where you will find wonders, okay? The fascinating part is the ecological niche in Darwin. This is where Darwin becomes extraordinary, okay? This is why it becomes extraordinary, the ecological niche. Then every organism you see here has a slightly specialized role. There are ambush predators, for example, frogfish, or stargazers, or flathead crocodile fish, or something. They're ambush predators. They're opportunistic, and the sand makes ideal place for them where prey could not easily hide. It will swim past them and therefore become food. Okay. Then there are engineers in this ecological niche. The engineers are the borrowers, like the shrimp goby, like some damsel, like some species of crabs, the borrowers itself. And they are engineers that create more ecological niche within the sand. Then there are also cleaners that are advertising their services, not on a reef, but on the sand patch, where borrowers or the engineers has created some kind of hump on the sand or whatever. The cleaner fish go there and dance. It dance. The dance is an advertising saying that, hey, I'm available. If you want to clean yourself, come over, and then I will clean. And then the camouflage specialists also live in there. There's a lot of animal that lives in the sand area, the ecological niche, that are excellent camouflage. Yeah, some of them, just like the seahorses, for example, they're also found on sandy bottom a lot. And sometimes they change color. They change their looks. And there are also cuttlefish that is capable of completely change texture, not just color, to blend in with the sand environment, for example. Yeah. And then there are bobtail squid that are capable of hiding under the sand. And also, there are also actually a tiny ambush predators. Then there are filter feeders, like the buffalo horn shells, you call it. Yeah. They filter feed. So there's an ecosystem. And that ecosystem, before you go and smother it with your fins, they are clean. The waters are filtered. There are cleaners, there are engineers, everybody is working in that. And that ecological niche is different. But then there are fundamental principles of the same ecology, ecosystem, habitat, and ecological niche is the same. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? When we step back and compare both locations, Maya Bay and Darwin, Maya Bay teaches us about recovery of an ecosystem, restart when pressure is removed. Darwin teaches us about precision, how delicate ecosystems are. Then the habitat truly are both reinforced by the same truth of ecosystem, habitat, and ecological niches. The ecosystem is functioning, the habitat is suitable, and the niches must be filled for the entire ecosystem to work. So this is how everything works together. So when you look at two places, I don't want you to see a fabulous bay or a macro diving site or whatever. I want you to train your eyes to ask, what are the processes? What defines the habitat here? What role are being played and which are missing? Because whether it's Maya Bay or Darwin, ocean is always telling you the same story. There's an ecosystem, there's a habitat, and there's ecological niche. And what we will need to know is that once you understand these three layers, you're no longer just observing marine life. You understand how life sustains itself. That is important. Observe, understand, protect, and if necessary, restore. Intervention is the last resort. If necessary, restore. So I open now for any questions. Guys, are you still there? Hello? Anybody home?
Yes, we are here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, question. Any question? Any kind of question? Not necessarily about Maya Bay and Darwin. Anything? No question?
Can I ask something?
Okay.
Hi, actually, I was thinking of Maya Bay. If you just left it without having to put any interference of the of like putting the corals so that the habitat would come back. I was wondering if you just left it as it is, would it eventually turn into like white sand since everything
It's
was
moving.
already dead?
Probably will be because all the structures or the dead corals are moving around in the currents, in the waves. It might grind each other and become sand. It might, but that will take time. Of course, the role of Maya Bay is to become a model of ecological restoration that will become example to other locations in the region to see the necessity of closure of some areas and creating sanctuaries where careful, I'm saying very, very carefully, take the right steps to address the issue, like we address the issue of the unstable substrate, for example. That's the only thing we address. And then we also address the time taken for coral to come back. It's longer. That is why we propagate coral. We did not propagate to create a dream garden, nor to glorify anyone. We are there to reintroduce coral to help speed up the process of recovery of coral within that ecosystem. Do we want to fill the entire bay with corals? That's the decision of the coral itself. That's not our decision. Yeah. So this is the true sense of conservation. Okay. Right. If there is no question, then I will say good night to you guys. I hope you will learn something today. Okay. I will be on the next Saturday. We will talk something else. Maybe a coral reef, maybe something that has been destroyed or recovered, or something similar stories. Okay? Good night, guys. Let me
Good
stop.
night. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah.